Have you ever met wealthy parents who force their kids to live as if they were at the very bottom of society? In today's story, I'll tell you about a family with millions of dollars in the bank, yet they made their children practice poverty every single day. No dinners, cold showers, nights, sleeping outside, every reaction written down in a journal as if their own kids were part of some twisted experiment. It sounds absurd, but it went so far that the legal system had to step in. And here's the question: was this really about building resilience? Or was it a carefully disguised form of abuse? Let's dive into the journey. Chapter 1: Poverty Lessons from the Rich. I grew up in a four-bedroom house with locked iron gates, a crystal blue swimming pool, and a garage that could fit three cars. Sounds like the American dream, right? But for me, it felt more like a disguised training camp. My parents were wealthy, but they were so obsessed with poverty that they turned it into their own religion. I still remember the sentence my mother repeated over and over, the one that haunted me throughout my childhood. Comfort makes children soft, and soft children die first. Back then, I didn't understand anything beyond the chill that crawled down my spine. No kid wants to hear their own mother say flat out that if they ever became soft, they would die. But that was exactly how she explained everything. My father was a software engineer with a six-figure salary. My mother was a lawyer with a closet full of designer clothes. Yet every day they forced me and my siblings to practice being poor. Not in the sense of teaching us to save money or avoid wasteful spending. I mean, literally role-playing poverty. I was only 9 when I brought home a report card full of straight A's. Instead of hugging me and praising me, my father barely glanced at it before coldly saying, "Success makes people soft." That night, I was forced to sleep on the freezing concrete floor of the garage for an entire week. Yeah, why? To keep me tough, in case we ever lost everything. It sounds insane, but to them it was logical. They had both grown up in real poverty, and that obsession followed them into adulthood. My father had once been homeless for 6 months. My mother told stories of going hungry, chewing grass just to ease the pain in her stomach. Those memories convinced them that poverty never truly disappears. It just waits at the doorstep. And they were determined to mold us into children who were untouchable. So instead of enjoying a normal childhood, we had to live in a warped reality. Hot water, a luxury, new clothes. Not for us, even though my mother's closet was packed with Versace and Chanel. Soft mattresses only to look at. To truly prepare, we had to sleep on the floor in the bathtub or out in the yard. They called all of this poverty practice. My mother even kept a meticulous record of every session in a poverty journal. Each time we complained about the cold or tried sneaking food, she would deduct points from our so-called survival score. The punishment could mean going another day without eating or being forced to sleep outside. The scariest part wasn't the harshness, it was their calmness. They didn't scream, didn't hit. They spoke gently, rationally, saying, "This is for your future." At this point, you might be asking, but what about love? Trust me. We asked ourselves the same thing, but the answer was clear: in that luxurious house, love had been boxed up and stored away, never to be found. Chapter 2: The Weekly Poverty Schedule. If you think poverty practice was just an occasional scare tactic, you'd be dead wrong. My parents turned it into a full schedule broken down by the day, as if it were some kind of special training program. And for us, it was as serious as military service. Mondays were hunger practice. We got a normal breakfast, but after that, nothing. The entire day went by while our parents cooked elaborate meals for themselves. They ate right in front of us, telling stories of their own poor days. My father described the feeling of ribs poking through his skin. My mother recounted chewing grass to trick her empty stomach. My little sister, only 6 years old, sat there sobbing from hunger. My father just said coldly, "Crying doesn't fill your stomach. Try it and see." Tuesdays were cold practice. My father would turn off the heater, throw open the windows, and make us study in heavy coats. Our fingers shook so badly we could hardly form letters on the page. He timed us, counting every minute to see how long we could endure before begging for warmth. Only when our knees were trembling and our lips had turned blue would we earn points. Wednesdays were sleeping rough. At night, we drew lots to see who had to sleep on the cold tile floor, who squeezed into the bathtub, and who got stuck outside in the yard. While we shivered, my father sat there recounting in painstaking detail the nights he had slept on the streets as a real homeless man. To him, it was about passing on the fire to the next generation. To us, it was just turning childhood into a nightmare. Thursdays were utilities practice. No electricity, no lights. Everything had to be done by candlelight, including homework. I still remember one time my younger brother nearly set his notebook on fire when a candle tipped over, and yet my mother only jotted down in the poverty journal, "Reaction too slow, needs improvement in survival skills." Fridays were shame practice. This was the day I hated most. We had to wear the same dirty clothes we'd worn all week. On Friday morning, my mother drove us to school in an old, scratched-up car instead of the shiny Mercedes. Our classmates stared, whispered, laughed. We could only hang our heads in silence. Our parents called it learning how to endure humiliation. And then came the weekend, poverty immersion, the advanced level of living poor. Sometimes our parents locked the doors and left us outside with nothing but the clothes on our backs. Sometimes they gave each of us $2 and told us to survive 2 whole days. My younger brother learned to fish in the park pond. I would creep around behind restaurants to scavenge leftovers, and our little sister, we gave her most of what little we found because she was too small to fend for herself. It might sound like science fiction, but for us, it was daily reality. A suffocating schedule carefully recorded in my mother's poverty journal, serving as proof that her children were being properly trained. And as I grew older, I started to see the painful truth: we weren't being prepared for poverty at all. We were just living inside a fake poverty, trapped in a luxurious house we never truly got to enjoy. Chapter 3. When fake poverty became real danger. During all those years, I slowly learned how to stay silent, because whenever we resisted, our parents would just push the poverty practice to a harsher level. I remember the first time I had a little money of my own. At 15, I got a job at McDonald's. I didn't use it to splurge or buy anything fancy. All I wanted was a few pairs of thicker socks and sometimes to buy myself a decent lunch. I hid the small amount of money in a box under my bed, but my father found it. Instead of being proud that his child was working, he flew into a rage as if I had betrayed the family's entire survival philosophy. The result was that the whole family had to be retrained from scratch. He dragged us out to the garage and forced us to sleep on the oil-stained concrete floor for an entire month. While the warm, spotless house stood right next door, we lay crammed together on the cold ground using plastic buckets as toilets. Every morning we had to carry the buckets to the backyard and dump them out quietly so the neighbors wouldn't see. My parents called it a necessary reset. To me, it was nothing but humiliation and despair. But the worst moment wasn't mine. It belonged to my 6-year-old sister. That winter, my father decided to escalate the cold practice. Instead of just wearing coats inside, we had to sleep outside in the yard for several nights. That night, the wind cut through our skin, and the next morning, my sister was wheezing, her lips turning purple. We begged our parents to take her to a doctor. My mother glanced over and said calmly, "This is how the body learns to fight on its own." But when she developed a high fever and a violent cough, they reluctantly drove her to the hospital. The doctor asked why such a young child had developed such a severe case of pneumonia. And in her innocence, my sister answered truthfully, "Mom and Dad made me sleep outside to practice being poor." That sentence hit like a bomb inside the exam room. The very next day, Child Protective Services knocked on our door. My parents didn't panic. They calmly gave the social worker a tour of the mansion closets full of designer clothes, tidy bedrooms, a kitchen overflowing with food. They explained it was only a mental resilience exercise, that they were raising us to be tough, but there was one thing they couldn't hide: the poverty journal. Inside were detailed entries of every day, every exercise, every punishment. Those pages filled with cold handwriting spoke louder than anything else. When the social worker interviewed each of us separately, we were too scared to lie. And for the first time in my life, I saw the stern eyes of an adult refusing to look away. The decision was immediate. We had to be removed from that house. That day, my younger brother only had time to grab his school backpack and the makeshift fishing rod he'd carved from a branch. My sister clutched the one worn-out teddy bear she was allowed to keep. I stuffed my McDonald's uniform and a few old clothes into a trash bag. Together, we walked out of the gleaming mansion, leaving behind the poverty training camp and the cold eyes of my father, who sat eating lunch as if nothing at all had happened. For the first time in years, we were taken to a new place, a strange roof over our heads, yes, but also the chance to finally learn what normal could mean. Chapter 4. The House that smelled of bread and real warmth. The woman who opened the door to us that day was named Catherine. In complete contrast to the coldness of my parents, she appeared in a flour-dusted apron with a gentle smile and warm eyes. And the first thing I noticed wasn't even her face, it was the smell. The whole house was filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread laced with basil and star anise. I had never smelled anything so comforting in my life. My little sister stopped at the doorway, her eyes wide as if she couldn't believe the scent was real. Catherine knelt down to her level and softly asked, "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" My sister nodded while my brother and I exchanged suspicious glances. We had been conditioned to expect traps, but Catherine didn't wait for an answer. She led us straight into the kitchen, where a plate of neatly cut triangular sandwiches was waiting along with cold glasses of milk, sliced apples, and bowls of peanut butter. I remember sitting frozen, just staring. My brother darted his eyes around, waiting for some kind of command, some hidden order. Instead of giving orders, Catherine sat down, took a bite of an apple in front of us, and smiled. "Go ahead. It's safe." We began slowly, hesitantly. But within minutes, our bodies betrayed our guarded minds. My brother and I devoured the food, while my sister chewed and cried at the same time. Catherine never commented on the way we kept our heads down, or on how my brother stuffed a few apple slices into his pocket. She simply added more food to the plate, pretending not to notice. The bedrooms were another shock. 2 bunk beds, with real mattresses sheets, washed with lavender, and closets stocked with extra blankets. A heater hummed softly, warming the entire room. My sister placed her hand on the mattress, pressing it as if it might vanish any second. That night, we lay fully clothed on top of the blankets, instead of under them, too accustomed to always being ready to flee. The next morning, Catherine woke us with a gentle voice, not with shouts or a list of poverty drills. Breakfast was eggs, toast, and orange juice. Beside the plates were brand new clothes, tags still attached. But unlike the clothes in my mother's closet, these were actually meant for us to wear. Going to school on a full stomach after sleeping in a real bed, I realized something I had never thought possible. When your body's no longer busy trying to survive, your mind finally has room to learn. Teachers began to notice, and for the first time, my little sister laughed during recess. We had lived in a luxurious house all our lives, yet we had never known what normal really was. Only when we stepped into Catherine's modest kitchen, heard the soft ticking of the oven, and smelled the bread rising, did we finally understand what safety felt like. And for the first time in years, I began to think maybe this was hope. Chapter 5. When kindness became a crime. We had been with Catherine for less than a week when the phone rang during dinner. I remember it clearly. That night we were eating spaghetti with tomato sauce, a simple dish, but so fragrant that my little sister couldn't stop smiling as she ate. Catherine answered the phone, and I saw her face change. She stepped into the hallway, but I still caught fragments of her words, concerns, misunderstandings, family values. When Catherine returned, she tried to smile, but her eyes flickered with a worry she couldn't quite hide. The very next day, Mrs. Chen, the social worker, showed up during dinner. She carried a file folder and spoke in a weary tone. She informed us that someone had reported Catherine for over-nurturing, making us weak, and destroying the years of training our parents had instilled. And the accusers, of course, it was our parents. Catherine's hands trembled as she walked Mrs. Chen through the house, a fridge full of food beds, with warm blankets, closets with clothes that actually fit us. Mrs. Chen took careful notes, snapped photos, and then interviewed each of us. I remember her asking, "Do you feel safe here? Do you get 3 meals a day?" I nodded and told her Catherine even gave us snacks, and that for the first time, we weren't shivering in the dark. Every word we spoke made Catherine breathe easier, but at the same time made Mrs. Chen frown. Because according to the law, this wasn't simply caregiving. Our parents had reframed it as sabotaging their parenting. A few days later, Catherine sat us down in the living room. She explained that our parents had hired lawyers and built an entire philosophy of child rearing called resilience training. They had even found other families practicing it and gathered them into an online community. Now they were turning it into a legal framework, arguing that taking us away was an infringement on their parental rights. My brother asked, "So, does that mean we have to go back?" Catherine stayed silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Only I can't promise, but I will fight." Her words made my chest tighten. I had thought the nightmare ended the day we walked out of that mansion, but it turned out our parents didn't need locked doors or a shut-off heater to bind us anymore. Now they had the law, sophisticated language, and even a community behind them. The next day during recess, I saw them, my father and mother standing outside the school fence, taking notes, like two researchers. My mother scribbled in her notebook, while my father timed us on his watch, observing the way we laughed and played with friends. To them, those joyful moments weren't signs of happiness, they were evidence that we were growing soft. We had once practiced poverty inside a wealthy house. But now, for the first time, I understood this nightmare wasn't just about harsh drills. It was a battle of willpower, of authority, and worst of all, over the very definition of what parental love is supposed to mean. Chapter 6, The Millers, a Legal Prison. The day we met the Millers, I knew something was wrong. They arrived exactly at 2 p.m., dressed as if for a business meeting rather than picking up 3 children. Mr. Miller wore a stiff suit and tie. Mrs. Miller smiled, but her eyes were cold, never truly meeting ours. They looked around Catherine's house, shaking their heads at the excessive toys and unnecessary abundance of food. Catherine stood nearby, her face tense. I could see she wanted to scream, but had to remain silent. As she packed the new clothes for us, she secretly slipped a few small notes between the folds, like final messages she couldn't speak out loud. And in her eyes I saw a fear I had never before seen in an adult, the fear of handing children over to dangerous hands. The Millers lived in the suburbs on a 5-acre property. Peaceful at first glance, yet the moment we stepped inside, a chill ran through me. The pantry was padlocked. The thermostat was encased in a plastic box locked tight. The bedrooms were in the basement walls, painted a sterile white, each bed stripped bare except for a thin blanket. "Each child gets their own room," they said as if it were a privilege. In reality, it was isolation. On the very first day, Mrs. Miller posted a schedule, a sheet of paper taped to the kitchen wall, divided by the hour like a military roster. 30 a.m., wake up. Cold bath days were marked in blue, fasting days in red, study time, gardening, chopping wood, reflection before bed, every slot already checked off. Lunch that day, 1 ham sandwich each. Nothing else. Water. When my brother asked if we would have dinner, Miller replied flatly, "Depends on your attitude and performance today." My sister was only 7 tiny, yet they still forced her to pull weeds in the garden, her little hands trembling as she tugged at stubborn roots. They called it teaching responsibility. We called it stealing childhood. Unlike our biological parents, the Millers knew exactly how to stay within legal boundaries. They didn't starve us, just gave barely enough, so no one could accuse them of malnutrition. They didn't force us to sleep outside in winter, only required cold baths for discipline. They didn't scream or curse, only recorded notes in our reflection journals and then made us read aloud thank yous for the training we received. We understood immediately this wasn't salvation. It was just an upgraded version of our old hell, wrapped in the label of lawful education. And worse, the system nodded in approval. But this time, we weren't just enduring. My brother had learned to observe and take notes. I had learned to pretend to be grateful, while secretly planning. And even my little sister, the child who once cried through a hunger Monday, began hiding her fear, tucking her teddy bear under her pillow, as a secret no one could strip away. Our parents had taught us how to survive fake poverty. The Millers taught us how to survive a legal prison. But both forgot one thing when you force children to act in order to survive. Sooner or later, they will write their own script. Chapter 7: The Secret Alliance and Hidden Evidence. At the Miller's house, we quickly understood that if we wanted to survive, we had to learn how to perform. My younger brother was the first to master the rules of the game. In the reflection journal the Millers forced us to submit, he wrote carefully crafted lines, like, "I am grateful for learning discipline, and I understand that hardship builds strength." Those fake phrases made Mr. and Mrs. Miller nod approvingly, but after the lights went out and the basement sank into silence, my brother would pull out a different notebook, the real one. In it, he recorded dates, meal portions, hours of labor, even the exact water temperature during cold baths. He sketched diagrams of the basement, marked the locked pantry, and even the locations of surveillance cameras. Looking at those pages gave me chills. He was only 14, yet had already become a criminal record keeper. As for me, I learned how to smile, nod, and answer just enough to make the Millers believe I was absorbing the philosophy. In reality, I was only biding my time. That opportunity came from school. My English teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed my essays were growing darker and heavier. One day she kept me after class and gently asked, "Are you okay?" I froze, unable to speak the truth. Instead, I just mentioned that I missed Catherine. That name was like a spark. Ms. Rodriguez nodded, telling me she knew Catherine from volunteer work, and if I wanted, she could pass along a message. I wrote a small note, folded in the silly origami style Catherine had once taught me. It was our secret signal: we need help. A few weeks later, I saw Catherine at the school library, pretending it was a coincidence. She didn't approach, just smiled politely at Ms. Rodriguez, but her eyes locked onto mine. In that moment, I knew she understood. Not long after, a new face appeared, Marcus, a sponsored tutor for us. Our foster parents believed he was just a college student teaching math and coding, but in reality, Marcus had once been one of Catherine's foster kids. He read us instantly. During lessons, Marcus taught my brother and me how to use computers safely, how to store files in the cloud, hide data with passwords, ensure every photo we took carried metadata. Every time the Millers thought we were solving equations, we were actually uploading evidence photos of the padlocked fridge notes about fasting days, the forced reflection charts. Even my little sister joined in. She learned to hide small drawings in borrowed library books, sketches of the plastic bucket we were forced to use as a toilet, or of herself pulling weeds under the sun. Those shaky lines became undeniable evidence. A 7-year-old could not invent such details. We became perfect actors. By day, we showed gratitude, ate the meager rations, and wrote fake thank yous. By night, we were silent witnesses, recording every scrap of truth. Our parents once thought they had taught us endurance. The Millers believed they were teaching us discipline, but in reality they had taught us how to gather evidence, how to live double lives, one for them to see and one for the truth. And for the first time, I felt maybe we would win. Not through strength, but through the very skill they never expected. The survival tactics they forced on us now turned back against them. Chapter 8: The First Trial. Turning the Tables. On the first day in court, I felt like I was stepping onto a stage. My parents sat there dressed immaculately in expensive clothes, their expressions calm, as if this were nothing more than a corporate meeting. Beside them was their smooth-talking lawyer, throwing out polished words like resilience and unique parenting philosophy. The Millers were there too, holding thick stacks of files, meticulously listing our so-called progress, working hard, eating in measured portions following discipline. To anyone glancing at those records, it might have looked like we were attending some elite boot camp designed for future prodigies, but we were prepared. When the judge requested to hear testimony directly from the children, my hands trembled until my brother brushed my arm lightly, a silent reminder. It's time. My little sister was called first. She sat clutching her torn old teddy bear, her voice small but steady. She spoke about what it felt like to be hungry, but not the normal kind of hungry, about the cold that made your hands shake so badly you couldn't even hold a pencil. No tears, no theatrics, just the truth. The entire courtroom went silent. My brother stood next, pulling out his notebook. Not the fake reflection journal, but the real one. Page after page, he showed the judge time logs, meal portions, secret photos of the locked fridge, even notes on the water temperature during cold baths. He spoke in a flat, factual tone like delivering a scientific report. The judge leaned forward, eyes fixed on every detail. By the time it was my turn, I wasn't trembling anymore. I laid it all out, the poverty drills with my parents, the discipline lessons at the Millers, the meals turned into rewards, the feeling of being turned into an experiment inside my own childhood. And then I drew the contrast life with Catherine. For the first time, a real bedful meals, and most importantly, the sense of actually being a child. As I spoke, I looked at my parents. They remained unfazed, calmly jotting notes into their infamous poverty journal, as if everything I said was just more data for their experiment. The Millers frowned, shook their heads, whispering to each other as though we were making it all up. But then the judge interrupted everyone. She looked directly at us, not at the lawyers, not at the files, and asked plainly, "Do you feel safe in your current environment?" My sister shook her head. My brother said, "We survive, but we are not safe." And I gave a single answer. Safety isn't knowing you can go 3 days without food. Safety is knowing you'll have dinner tonight. The room went utterly still. Finally, the judge ruled that we were to be removed immediately from the Miller's care. My parents' reunification plan was suspended until further investigation. Then the judge turned to Catherine, asking if she was willing to take us back temporarily. Catherine nodded, her eyes brimming, but her voice firm. "I'm always ready." I still remember the moment we stepped out of that courtroom. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath that didn't carry the damp smell of the basement or the icy sting of cold water. We had done it. Not a final victory, but at least we had turned the first battle in our favor. Chapter 9. A new crisis: siege, protests, and social pressure. I thought that, after the court ruling, once we returned to live with Catherine, things would finally be peaceful. But of course I was naive. My parents never knew how to lose. On Monday morning, as we were getting ready for school, I looked out the window and saw their poverty practice van parked at the end of the street. My mother sat in the passenger seat, scribbling furiously in her poverty journal, as if she were conducting field research. My father sat with a laptop on his knees, occasionally glancing up to stare directly at the house. And they didn't knock, didn't call, just sat there silent like vultures waiting for prey. The next day, it wasn't just them. 2, then 3 more cars joined in. I recognized some faces from the Resilience Club my parents used to brag about. They carried signs: parental rights, our human rights, hardship, builds, strength. They stood right at the end of the street, holding their slogans high, as if Catherine's home were a battlefield. The neighbors grew restless. Some called the police, but the officers only shrugged. They're on public property, not breaking any laws. So every morning that week, we slipped out the back door, sneaking away like fugitives just to avoid the crowd chanting, "Don't let children grow weak." My little sister started losing sleep. Every night she feared they would break into the house and drag us away. My brother reacted differently. He set up a camera by the living room window, photographing the signs, logging the times they arrived, tracking their every move. Partly for evidence, but I knew it was also because he couldn't bear the helplessness. Catherine tried to stay calm, but I could see the sighs growing heavier. She called the police, the social workers, even lawyers, but every answer was the same. They haven't broken the law. There's nothing we can do. By the fourth day, they brought loudspeakers. I still remember the raspy voice booming across the neighborhood. These children are being ruined by comfort, robbed of their future by weakness. Each word felt like a knife digging into my head. I wanted to fling the door open and scream back, but Catherine laid a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't. Every action you take now can be used against you." So we sat inside, eating dinner, under siege. The warm scent of toasted bread mixed with the angry chants of "Don't let them grow weak," creating a bitter irony almost too sharp to bear. On the fifth day, we slipped out the back again, catching a ride with one of Catherine's friends to the library. In the quiet of the reading room, Marcus and Miss Rodriguez were waiting. They said, "This is no longer just about you. This is a movement your parents are fueling." That was when I understood the battle had outgrown our family. It wasn't just the story of three unlucky kids anymore. My parents had turned it into an ideological war, and we unwillingly had become the center of the storm. Chapter 10, The Final Trial, A Decisive Verdict. On the day of the final trial, it didn't feel like I was walking into a courthouse. It felt like stepping into an arena where all the years of hunger, the secret notebooks, the silenced stares, would be weighed and measured in just a few hours of arguments. Outside the court, the crowd was louder than ever. My parents were no longer just two extremists acting alone. They had become movement leaders. People waved banners, handed out flyers about the benefits of hardship. There were news vans, cameras, microphones all pointed at us as if this were some grand sporting event. When we entered the courtroom, I saw my mother sitting upright, clutching the poverty journal to her chest like a sacred scripture. My father adjusted his tie eyes, gleaming as their new lawyer began to speak. His voice rang out talking about the freedom to raise children according to cultural values, about the dangers of government overreach into family life. He cited examples of successful entrepreneurs, famous athletes who had grown up in tough conditions. It sounded persuasive. If you ignored the fact that those children hadn't been starved in front of a fridge full of food, then it was our turn. My little sister went first, clutching her ragged old teddy bear, her voice trembling, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I just want to know for sure that dinner will be there." One simple sentence yet, I saw the judge freeze her pen, halting mid-page. My brother opened his notebook this time, hiding nothing. He presented like a true researcher, photographs, dates, weight charts, even pictures of thermometers from the cold practice days. Each page turned was a blade slicing through the wall of justifications my parents had built. I watched as their lawyer's confident expression began to tighten. When my turn came, I didn't read numbers. I spoke. I described the nights spent sleeping in the bathtub, the times I went hungry while listening to pots clatter in the kitchen below. I spoke about the feeling when Catherine placed a simple sandwich in front of me, how in that moment it felt more precious than gold. And I said, "People call that spoiling. I call it being treated like a human being." As I spoke, I saw my mother start to unravel. She flipped through her journal, reading aloud old entries. Day X, the child cried from the cold, but I saw it as a sign of weakness. Her voice cracked, tears falling onto the pages. My father gripped her shoulder tightly, but his face too was breaking. For the first time, I saw them not as stone statues, but as two deeply wounded people who had never healed. But pity couldn't blur the truth. Dr. Winters, the psychologist, stood and explained clearly, "This is not training. This is a systematized model of abuse." She held up documents breaking down how my parents had rationalized their obsession and why it caused long-term harm to children. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. Her tone was calm, but each word fell like a gavel's strike. We would remain with Catherine permanently, if necessary. Our parents would only have supervised visitation in the presence of a therapist. Any attempt to reinstate poverty practice would be treated as deliberate abuse. My mother collapsed into her seat, sobbing. My father bowed his head, hands trembling. Outside, the crowd of supporters may have still been chanting slogans, but inside that courtroom, the silence was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. We walked out, Catherine beside us. No banners, no slogans, only the smell of bread she had packed in the car. And for the first time in years, I believed that our lives could truly change. Chapter 11. After the trial, learning to live again as a child. That day when we left the courthouse, I thought I would feel instant relief. Yeah, but in truth, all I felt was emptiness. For so many years, we had focused only on survival, measuring out every bite of food, every fleeting moment of warmth. And now, when the judge said we were safe, I realized I didn't know what to do with that safety at all. Catherine didn't say much on the way home. She simply drove one hand on the steering wheel, the other reaching back to gently rest on my little sister's knee, as if to remind her that she was still here. The car was filled with the warm scent of bread, and for the first time I wasn't curling into myself afraid of being scolded for eating too much. That night, Catherine made hot cocoa complete with marshmallows, my sister's favorite. We sat around the dinner table with no legal documents, no cameras gathering evidence, no journals of suffering. Just a normal meal. It sounded simple, but to us it felt like a miracle. The next morning, I woke up in my own real bed, not a freezing concrete floor, not a hard bathtub. A blanket that smelled of lavender, a soft pillow sunlight filtering through the curtains. I lay still for a long time, trying to believe that no one would come in to force me up for poverty practice. My brother still hadn't let go of the habit of keeping a journal. But instead of listing weights, hours locked outside, or cold bath temperatures, he started writing down normal things. Breakfast today was eggs and toast. Didn't feel cold today. Laughed 3 times. I think it was his way of relearning how to live, not just survive. My little sister clung to 2 stuffed animals, the old bear and the new elephant Catherine had given her. She still hid food in drawers, but less and less, because every time Catherine found it, she would just smile gently and say, "You can keep it. But remember, there will always be food here, even if you don't hide it." Slowly, my sister began to believe it. And me. I had to learn to believe I could want something simply because I liked it, not because I needed it to survive. I went back to my job at McDonald's, but this time I didn't stuff my pay into old socks. I began saving for college. A real goal, not just a survival reserve. Therapy sessions also started. At first I hated them. I didn't want to sit there recounting painful memories to a stranger. But then I realized for the first time someone was listening, not to take notes or measure endurance, but to understand, to help me move forward. That was a difference I had never known before. Our parents were still allowed visits under supervision of a therapist. Those meetings were strange. They no longer ordered us, no longer demanded we train through hardship. They just sat there awkwardly handing us clothes that actually fit, or a few books. In their eyes, I saw regret, but also obsession. They hadn't escaped the loop of fearing poverty. I don't know if they ever will. But at least their obsession no longer held power over our lives. I began to understand that strength doesn't only come from endurance. It also comes from joy, from security, from having someone love you without demanding anything in return. And maybe that was the most important lesson Catherine gave us, the lesson our parents never could. We weren't completely normal yet. My sister still flinched at the sound of a slamming door. My brother still kept a notebook hidden under his pillow. I still panicked whenever I saw a car parked too long outside. But day by day, we were learning to trust in a new reality, that dinner would always be on the table, that the bed would always be warm, that love didn't always come with punishment. And when I saw my sister giggling over having ice cream on a weekday, or my brother excitedly joining the school computer club, I knew we weren't just surviving anymore. We were beginning to live. So after years of struggle, the journey finally came to an end. at least when the court made it clear these kids deserve to be fed, to be warm, and to be loved like any other children. The irony, their parents, in their obsession with poverty, had created something far crueler than poverty itself. And it leaves me asking, does true strength come from enduring suffering, or from knowing you are worthy of love? What do you think were the parents in this story simply victims of their own harsh childhoods? Or were they calculated abusers hiding behind a philosophy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy true Reddit stories like this, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next one. For now, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.